I am Hannah, 28, and my father was my world after Mum died. We were inseparable until he remarried. I never imagined hearing him say, "You are not my child anymore. We need to start fresh without the past." Those words shattered me, but I just smiled and walked away. 6 months later, when his perfect new life collapsed, and he desperately needed my help, I simply returned his exact words to him. Before I share my story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe. If you have ever had to rebuild your life after someone you loved chose someone else. After my mother died from cancer when I was 8 years old, my dad and I became everything to each other. We were more than just father and daughter. We were a team best friends navigating the world together. Every night for months after Mum passed, Dad would sit on the edge of my bed holding my hand until I fell asleep. "It is just us now, Hannah Banana," he would whisper, "but we are going to be okay. We have each other," and we did have each other completely. Dad rearranged his work schedule at the architectural firm to be home when I finished school. He learned to braid my hair badly at first, but he improved with practice, joined the PTA, and never missed a single school event. I still remember the pride in his eyes at my 5th grade science fair when my project on renewable energy won first place. He hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, telling everyone within earshot, "That is my daughter." As I grew older, our bond only strengthened. Every Sunday became our sacred day. We would make blueberry pancakes together in the morning, then go hiking to museums or simply driving with no particular destination. During those drives, we would talk about everything: my dreams, his work, memories of Mum. Sometimes we would just sit in comfortable silence, the radio playing softly in the background. When I was accepted to Northwestern University to study finance, Dad threw me a surprise party and invited all my friends. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said that night, his voice cracking slightly. "I know I am." He took on extra projects at work to help with tuition, despite my scholarships covering most of it. "Your education comes first, Hannah," he insisted, whenever I expressed concern about his long hours. Throughout college, we spoke on the phone at least twice a week, and I came home for most holidays. After graduation, when I landed my first job as a junior financial analyst at a respected firm in Chicago, Dad drove 5 hours to help me move into my apartment. He spent the entire weekend assembling furniture and hanging pictures, making sure everything was perfect before he left. A year into my career, Dad faced financial difficulties when his firm downsized during an economic slump. Without hesitation, I helped him restructure his finances using the skills from my new profession. Together, we created a budget that helped him stay afloat until he found a new position. "I do not know what I would do without you," he told me one night over dinner. "You are the best thing in my life, Hannah." Dad dated occasionally throughout my teenage and college years, but nothing serious ever developed. A few women came and went. Karen, the kindergarten teacher who loved baking, Susan, the bookstore owner with the infectious laugh, Deborah, the dental hygienist, who was allergic to our cat. Dad was always straightforward about why these relationships ended. She was nice, but something was missing, or we just want different things in life. Then Janet entered the picture when I was 27. From the beginning, she was different from the others. For one thing, she was significantly younger than Dad, only 15 years older than me. She worked in sales at a luxury car dealership, where Dad met her while looking for a modest replacement for his aging sedan. Somehow he left with a sports car he could barely afford and her phone number. I tried to be welcoming when Dad first introduced us at dinner. "I have heard so much about you," Janet said with a tight smile that never quite reached her eyes. Throughout the meal, she directed most of the conversation toward Dad, asking few questions about my life and steering topics away from shared memories or inside jokes between Dad and me. Still, I was determined to support Dad's happiness. I invited Janet to join us for our Sunday traditions, suggested gifts for Dad that I knew he would love, and always made an effort to engage her in conversation. But I began noticing subtle ways she seemed to compete for Dad's attention, interrupting when I was speaking dismissively, referring to childhood stories as ancient history, placing her hand possessively on Dad's arm whenever I made him laugh. "Your father and I are thinking of traveling more," she mentioned one evening 3 months into their relationship. "Do not you think he deserves to enjoy life now that you are all grown up?" The implication was clear. Dad had done his duty raising me, and now it was time for him to focus on her. When Dad called to announce their engagement after just 5 months of dating, I was stunned but tried to sound enthusiastic. "Are you sure, Dad? It seems fast," I ventured carefully. "When you know," he replied, sounding younger and more carefree than I had heard him in years. "Janet makes me feel alive again, Hannah. I noticed changes in Dad almost immediately after the engagement. Our Sunday traditions gradually disappeared, replaced by brunches with Janet's friends or open houses for properties she suddenly wanted to view. Our twice-weekly phone calls became sporadic, with Dad often sounding distracted or cutting conversations short because Janet was waiting for him. "Dad, are we okay?" I asked during one of our increasingly rare phone conversations. "I feel like we barely talk anymore." "Of course we are okay, honey," he assured me, though his tone lacked conviction. "I am just busy with wedding planning and work. Janet has so many great ideas for our future." I tried to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. This was just an adjustment period, I told myself. Once they settled into married life, things would return to normal. Dad and I had been through too much together for anything to truly come between us. How wrong I would turn out to be. The wedding planning moved at a whirlwind pace. Janet hired a wedding planner who seemed to materialize decisions without much input from anyone else. When I offered to help address invitations or accompany Dad to taste cakes, Janet would respond with a dismissive, "We have it handled, but thanks for offering." I was surprised when the invitation arrived in my mailbox rather than receiving a personal call from Dad about the date. Even more surprising was my role, or lack thereof, in the ceremony. No mention of being a bridesmaid, let alone maid of honor. When I carefully broached the subject with Dad over the phone, he sounded uncomfortable. "Janet thinks it would be odd to have my adult daughter in the wedding party," he explained hesitantly. "She says bridesmaids are typically the bride's friends and family. But I am your family," I responded, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. "Of course you are, Hannah," he rushed to assure me. "You will still be a special part of the day, just in a different way." That different way turned out to be sitting in the front row like any other guest, with no acknowledgement of my relationship to the groom. At the reception, I discovered I was seated at a table far from the wedding party with distant acquaintances rather than with family. During the photographer's session, I stood waiting for the inevitable family photos. But Janet orchestrated a series of combinations that somehow never included me, the bride and groom, alone, the couple with her parents, the couple with her siblings, the couple with her nieces and nephews. When I finally stepped forward, assuming my turn had come, Janet smiled thinly. "I think we have all the family shots we need," she said, her hand firmly on Dad's arm. "We are running behind schedule." I caught Dad's eye, expecting him to object, to insist I be included, but he just gave me an apologetic half-smile and allowed himself to be led away. Later during the reception, I overheard Janet speaking to her mother near the restrooms, unaware I was in a nearby stall. "No, Mother, I do not want her hovering around us constantly," Janet was saying in a hushed but irritated tone. "Mark needs to focus on our new life together, not constantly reminiscing about the past. She is an adult with her own life. She does not need to be at every family gathering. She is his only child," her mother replied, sounding uncertain. "And I am his wife," Janet responded firmly. "That takes precedence now." I remained in the bathroom stall long after they left, trying to compose myself and stop the tears that threatened to ruin my makeup. By the time I returned to the reception, Dad and Janet were preparing to leave for their honeymoon, and I barely had time for a quick, awkward hug goodbye. After the wedding, the changes accelerated. Our traditional Sunday phone calls were frequently missed or cut short. Dad began cancelling our monthly father-daughter dinners, usually with last-minute texts citing Janet's surprise plans or unexpected visitors. "Maybe next month will be better," became his regular refrain, though next month never seemed to improve. The first major holiday after the wedding was Thanksgiving. When I called to confirm details, assuming I would join them as I had for every holiday of my life, Dad hesitated. "Janet and I have decided to spend Thanksgiving with her family in Arizona this year," he said. "It is important for me to bond with them. You understand, right?" I swallowed hard. "Sure, Dad. Maybe Christmas then." Another pause. "We will have to see. Janet has some ideas about Christmas in the Bahamas." My birthday in February passed without the customary call from Dad singing off-key, a tradition that had survived even my college years abroad. When I finally received a text at 9 p.m, "Happy birthday, Hannah. Hope it was a good one," I knew something fundamental had changed. It was the first time in 20 years that he had forgotten to call, and the impersonal message felt like it came from a distant acquaintance, not my father. Through social media, I discovered vacation photos of Dad and Janet in places we had always talked about visiting together someday. There were posts about weekend barbecues and dinner parties with friends I had never heard him mention. A new life was taking shape, one that clearly had no room for me. I tried to rationalize his behavior. Dad deserved happiness after years of putting me first. Maybe this was natural, parents and adult children creating more separate lives. Perhaps I was being selfish in expecting our relationship to remain unchanged. But no matter how I tried to frame it, the pain of being increasingly excluded from his life cut deep. The final straw was Easter Sunday. I had been invited, a rare occurrence, to join them for dinner. When I arrived at their new house, purchased after they sold the home I grew up in, Janet answered the door with a strained smile. "Hannah, we were not expecting you for another hour," she said, though I was exactly on time according to the invitation. Inside, I found the dining table beautifully set for 6 people with Janet's sister and her husband already seated along with Janet's parents. They looked surprised to see me. "We thought you were coming for dessert later," Janet's mother said, confusion evident in her voice. I looked at Dad, who avoided my eyes, suddenly very interested in refilling his wine glass. It became painfully clear that Janet had deliberately given me a different arrival time than the rest of the guests, ensuring I would miss the actual meal and only be present for a brief appearance afterward. Throughout the awkward dessert that followed, Janet dominated the conversation with stories of their life together, interrupting whenever I attempted to engage Dad in conversation. After an hour of this treatment, I made my excuses and left sitting in my car for several minutes to collect myself before driving home. That night, I called my best friend Sophie in tears. "I feel like I am losing him," I sobbed, "or like I have already lost him, and I do not know what I did wrong." "You have not done anything wrong, Hannah," Sophie assured me. "Janet is isolating him from you, and he is letting it happen. You need to talk to him directly without her present." I knew she was right, but getting Dad alone seemed increasingly impossible. Still, I had to try. The next day I texted him, "Dad, can we meet for coffee this week? Just the 2 of us. It is important." 3 days passed before he responded, "Sure, Hannah." Wednesday at 2 p.m. at Riverview Cafe. A public place rather than his home or office. A time in the middle of the workday ensuring our conversation would be limited. But it was something at least. I had no idea it would be the conversation that would change everything. That Wednesday was sunny but cool, a perfect spring day that belied the storm brewing in my heart. I arrived at Riverview Cafe 20 minutes early, securing a table in the corner where we could talk with some privacy. I ordered a latte and rehearsed what I wanted to say, determined to remain calm and rational no matter how the conversation unfolded. Dad arrived precisely at 2 p.m, dressed in a suit I did not recognize. He had lost weight and his hair was styled differently, shorter and more contemporary than his usual conservative cut. He looked good, but somehow unfamiliar, like a slightly altered version of the father I knew. "Hannah," he said, giving me a brief hug before sitting down. His posture was stiff, professional, reminiscent of how he might greet a client rather than his daughter. "You look well." "So do you, Dad," I replied, searching his face for the warmth that had always been there before. "New suit." "Janet has been helping me update my wardrobe," he explained, ordering just a black coffee when the server approached. "Says I was stuck in the past decade." We exchanged awkward small talk about the weather and my job with Dad, repeatedly checking his watch. After 15 minutes of this painful dance around meaningful conversation, I finally gathered my courage. "Dad, what is going on with us?" I asked directly. "We barely talk anymore. You cancel our plans. I was excluded from all the family photos at your wedding. And at Easter, Janet gave me a different arrival time than everyone else." Dad's face tightened and he glanced around the cafe as if worried someone might overhear. "Hannah, you are imagining things. Janet is just very organized about scheduling." "Dad, please," I pressed, feeling my carefully prepared speech crumbling. "Something has changed. I feel like I am losing you and I do not understand why." He sighed deeply, setting down his barely touched coffee. "Hannah, you are an adult now. You have your own life, your own career. It is natural for parents and children to become less central to each other's lives as time goes on." "Less central is one thing," I countered, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Being systematically excluded is another. Dad, we used to talk twice a week. We had traditions. Now I feel like a distant acquaintance you are obligated to check in with occasionally." Dad's jaw tightened, and when he spoke again, his voice had a rehearsed quality, as if reciting lines he had practiced. "Actually, Hannah, that is partly why I agreed to meet today. Janet and I have been discussing our future together, and we both feel it is time to make some changes." "Kassim." A cold sensation spread through my chest. "What kind of changes?" Dad looked down at his coffee cup, turning it slowly with his fingers. "Janet feels, and I agree, that for our marriage to truly thrive, we need to start fresh, without the baggage of the past." The air seemed to vanish from the room. "Baggage?" I repeated, my voice barely audible. Is that what I am to you now, baggage? Dad continued, as if he had not heard me, still not meeting my eyes. What I am trying to say, Hannah, is that Janet and I need to establish our life together without constant reminders of my previous life. Previous life? I echoed, feeling increasingly disconnected from reality. Dad, I am not a previous life. I am your daughter. That was when he finally looked up, his expression resolved but distant in a way I had never seen before. Janet feels that it would be healthier for us to create some distance. She thinks, and again I agree, that it is time for us to acknowledge that you are a grown woman who does not need a father in the same way anymore. My hands began to tremble so violently that I had to place them flat on the table to steady them. What exactly are you saying, Dad? He drew a deep breath, and the words he spoke next would forever divide my life into before and after. I am saying that Janet and I are starting a new chapter, Hannah. And in this new chapter, I cannot continue to be your father in the same way. In fact, Janet feels strongly that for us to truly move forward, I need to let go of that role entirely. You are not my child anymore, not in the way you were. We need to start fresh without the past. The cafe continued to bustle around us, but I heard nothing except a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The world seemed to tilt and blur at the edges. I felt simultaneously numb and in excruciating pain, like a limb being severed while under inadequate anesthesia. Janet feels. I finally managed my voice surprisingly steady. You keep saying Janet feels. What do you feel, Dad? Do you actually want to stop being my father? Something flickered in his eyes. Doubt perhaps, or pain, but it was quickly suppressed. This is what is best for my marriage. Janet and I are building something new together, and she needs to know she comes first without competition. Competition, I whispered. I was never competing with her. I just wanted to remain part of your life. Dad shifted uncomfortably, then added what I assume he thought was a softening blow. Of course, this does not mean we can never see each other. Perhaps occasional holidays or a casual lunch now and then. Janet suggests quarterly visits might be appropriate, like distant relatives. Distant relatives. The words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. Also, he continued, now speaking more briskly as if moving through a checklist. Since you are financially independent with your own career, I will be removing you from my will and insurance policies. Janet feels those should be reserved for our immediate family. Our immediate family. A family that apparently no longer included me. Dad glanced at his watch again. I have a meeting at 3, so I should get going. I hope you understand this is for the best, Hannah. You are an adult. It is time for both of us to move forward separately. I sat perfectly still, feeling strangely calm despite the earthquake reshaping my entire world. 20 years of love, of being told I was the most important person in his life, erased in a 15-minute conversation in a coffee shop. What happened next surprised even me. Instead of breaking down, instead of begging or arguing, I simply smiled. It was not a happy smile, but it was genuine. The smile of someone finally seeing truth with perfect clarity. I understand completely. I said, my voice soft but unwavering. You have made your choice very clear. Dad looked momentarily thrown by my reaction, perhaps expecting tears or pleading. So, you are okay with this? I did not say I was okay with it. I clarified, standing up and gathering my purse. I said I understand. Goodbye, Dad. I walked out of the cafe without looking back, my posture straight and my pace measured. It was only when I reached my car that the full impact hit me. My hands shook so badly I could not insert the key into the ignition. The first sob broke free, then another, until I was gasping for breath, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel. I fumbled for my phone and called Sophie, barely able to speak through my tears. He said I am not his child anymore. I managed between sobs. He said they need to start fresh without the past. Without me. Where are you? Sophie demanded, alarm clear in her voice. Do not drive. I am coming to get you. 20 minutes later, Sophie pulled up beside my car. She helped me into her passenger seat and drove me to her apartment, where I finally allowed myself to completely fall apart in the safety of her presence. That night, curled on Sophie's couch, with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, I felt like I was 8 years old again, losing a parent. Except this time, my father had chosen to leave me behind. The days immediately following that cafe conversation were a blur of pain and disbelief. I called in sick to work for a week, unable to focus or function normally. Sophie stayed with me as much as possible, forcing me to eat when I had no appetite, and sitting with me through nights when sleep refused to come. You need to eat something, Hannah, she would insist, placing toast or soup in front of me. Even just a few bites. Aqui says identify. My body seemed to physically register the rejection. My stomach constantly ached. My chest felt perpetually tight and migraines plagued me for the first time in my life. I lost 8 pounds in those initial weeks, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. This is a trauma response, Sophie said gently one evening after I had barely touched the dinner she prepared. Your body is processing this as grief, which it is. You are mourning the loss of your father and the relationship you thought you had. A month passed with no contact from Dad. No call to check if I was okay, no text message, not even an email. It was as if 20 years of being his Hannah banana had been erased overnight. Photographs of us together, once prominently displayed in his home, were absent from the few social media posts I allowed myself to view before blocking both him and Janet. Sophie, along with my friends Taylor and James, created a rotation, so I was rarely alone during those first fragile weeks. They took turns bringing meals, accompanying me on walks when I finally ventured outside again, and simply sitting with me during the worst moments of despair. You need professional support, Hannah, Taylor suggested carefully one evening. This is too much to process on your own. I knew she was right. Through my company's employee assistance program, I found Dr. Martinez, a therapist specializing in family estrangement and adult trauma. Our first session was mainly me sobbing while trying to articulate what had happened. What you are experiencing is parental abandonment trauma, Dr. Martinez explained during our second session. It is particularly complex because it happened in adulthood after decades of what you described as a loving, secure relationship. I keep thinking I must have done something wrong, I admitted, that there must have been signs I missed or ways I failed him. From what you have described, this appears to be about your father's choices and his new wife's influence. Not anything you did, Dr. Martinez replied. Some people, when entering new relationships, particularly later in life, become vulnerable to influence that isolates them from previous attachments. Your father appears to have allowed his new wife to redefine his priorities and relationships. We worked on processing my grief in stages, acknowledging the reality of what had happened, working through the pain, adjusting to my new reality, and eventually finding ways to reinvest my emotional energy elsewhere. You cannot control your father's choices, Dr. Martinez reminded me often, but you can control how you respond and rebuild your life. Work became my sanctuary. I threw myself into projects, volunteered for additional responsibilities, and stayed late most evenings. My supervisor, Diane, noticed the change. Your work has always been excellent, Hannah, she said during a performance review 3 months after my father's rejection. But lately, you have been exceptional. However, I am concerned you are using work to avoid dealing with personal issues. Her perceptiveness brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I found myself confiding in her about my situation. My father essentially disowned me because his new wife wanted him to start fresh. I explained, struggling to keep my voice professional. Diane's expression softened with genuine concern. Hannah, I had no idea. Take whatever time you need. The work will still be here. But I did not want time off. Work provided structure and purpose when everything else felt chaotic and meaningless. What I needed was connection, not isolation. Around this time, I reached out to my maternal grandmother, who lived in a retirement community in Florida. We had always been close, but distance meant our contact had become less frequent over the years. When I called and finally shared what had happened, her response was fierce and immediate. I am coming to stay with you for a while, she declared, brooking no argument. Your grandfather and I always worried about how Mark would handle being both mother and father to you. He did well for many years, but this is unconscionable. Grandma Elaine arrived a week later, bringing with her photo albums I had never seen, filled with pictures of my mother from childhood through our early years as a family. You are so much like her, Grandma said one evening as we looked through the photos. Not just in appearance, but in your strength and determination. Catherine would be so proud of the woman you have become. She stayed for 2 weeks, during which she cooked my favorite childhood meals, insisted on regular walks in the sunshine, and most importantly, reinforced my sense of family and belonging. You come from a long line of strong women, Hannah, she reminded me. Your mother faced challenges with grace and resilience, and you have inherited that strength. No one can erase who you are or where you come from, not even your father. Before returning to Florida, Grandma gave me a necklace that had belonged to my mother. Catherine wanted you to have this when you were old enough to appreciate it. I think that time is now. Remember, no matter what happens with your father, you will always be Catherine's daughter. That is a part of your identity that can never be taken away. Through Dr. Martinez, I found a support group for adult children experiencing family estrangement. The first meeting was intimidating, sitting in a circle with strangers preparing to share my most painful experiences. But the relief of being among people who truly understood was immeasurable. My mother chose her new boyfriend over me. She had a woman named Rachel. She told me I was too much work and that she deserved to focus on her happiness now. My parents disowned me when I came out as gay, said Michael, a soft-spoken man in his 30s. They said they no longer had a son. My father remarried and his new wife systematically pushed me out of his life. I shared when my turn came. Eventually, he told me I was not his child anymore because they needed a fresh start. Nods of recognition, murmurs of understanding, and expressions of genuine empathy surrounded me. For the first time since that day in the cafe, I felt completely seen and validated in my pain. These new connections became lifelines. We met weekly, sometimes grabbing dinner afterward, or exchanging texts between sessions. They understood the complexities of my grief in ways even my closest friends could not, having walked similar paths themselves. With their support and Dr. Martinez's guidance, I began to rebuild my identity, separate from being Mark Anderson's daughter. I created new weekend traditions. Saturday morning yoga classes, followed by farmers market visits, Sunday afternoon book club meetings at my favorite local bookstore. I changed my phone number partly to prevent anxiety each time the phone rang, wondering if it might be Dad, and partly as a symbolic gesture of starting my own fresh chapter. I moved to a new apartment in a different neighborhood, one I had chosen entirely on my own preferences, without considering what Dad would think of it. Slowly, painfully, I was learning to live in a world where the person who had been my constant, my foundation since childhood, had willingly walked away. The ache never completely disappeared, but it gradually transformed from an acute, debilitating pain to a dull background throb that I could function around. Grief does not end, Dr. Martinez told me during one session. It changes shape and intensity. Your goal is not to eliminate it, but to build your life around it, to find joy and purpose despite its presence. 6 months after that devastating cafe conversation, I was not healed, not completely, but I was healing. And that made all the difference. As the initial shock and acute grief began to subside, I found myself channeling energy into rebuilding my life with intention. Work had always been important to me, but now I approached it with renewed focus and determination. When an opportunity arose to lead a new project, helping small businesses restructure their finances after the economic downturn, I volunteered immediately. "This is exactly what we need," my director said after reviewing my proposal. "Hannah, I would like you to head this initiative. It means a promotion to senior analyst and a team of your own." The promotion came with increased responsibilities, longer hours and more pressure, all of which I welcomed. The complexity of the work demanded complete concentration, leaving little mental space for dwelling on my personal pain. Each successful client meeting, each business we helped stay afloat, provided concrete evidence that I was making a difference in the world, regardless of my father's rejection. My social circle expanded in unexpected ways. Sophie remained my rock, but I also developed deeper connections with colleagues like Marcos from the international division and Alyssa from marketing. We started a monthly dinner club, taking turns hosting and trying recipes from different cultures. "To Hannah," Marcos toasted during one such gathering, raising his glass of wine, "who shows us all what resilience looks like." The comment brought unexpected tears to my eyes. 6 months earlier, I had felt utterly broken, unable to imagine ever feeling whole again. Now surrounded by friends in my new apartment, I recognized glimpses of joy returning to my life. That apartment became a project of self-discovery. I painted the walls colors I loved without considering anyone else's preferences. I filled bookshelves with novels and finance journals, hung art that spoke to me, and created a small balcony garden. Every choice reflected who I was becoming rather than who I had been. "This place is so you," Sophie remarked during her first visit after I finished decorating. "It feels peaceful but energetic at the same time." With my first bonus from the promotion, I booked a solo trip to Portugal, something I had always wanted to do but had hesitated to pursue alone. For 10 days, I wandered through cobblestone streets, ate at local restaurants, practiced my rudimentary Portuguese, and sat on beaches watching magnificent sunsets. I sent postcards to Sophie, Grandma Elaine, and my support group friends, but took no photos for social media and checked email only once. The trip was transformative in ways I had not anticipated. Away from familiar contexts and responsibilities, I discovered parts of myself that had been overshadowed by my identity as Mark Anderson's daughter. An adventurous spirit, a knack for making friends despite language barriers, a willingness to get lost and find my way again. On my last night in Lisbon, sitting at a small cafe watching the sunset paint the city gold, I realized I had not thought about Dad for an entire day. The realization brought a complex mixture of liberation and sadness. I was moving forward, but the cost had been so high. Back home, I began to carefully consider my personal relationships, particularly with men. My therapist had gently suggested that my father's abandonment might impact my romantic choices and expectations. After experiencing rejection from the first man in your life, you might either avoid emotional intimacy altogether or seek out relationships where you try to win approval in ways you could not with your father, Dr. Martinez explained. This insight led me to pause an emerging relationship with Andrew, a charming finance director I had met through work. While there were many qualities I genuinely appreciated about him, I recognized patterns that concerned me. His inconsistent availability, my disproportionate efforts to accommodate his schedule, my anxiety when he did not respond to messages promptly. I think I need to focus on myself right now, I told him honestly over coffee. I am working through some family issues that have affected how I approach relationships. Can you say nein? Rather than the disappointment I expected, Andrew responded with understanding. That takes courage, he said. Most people just keep cycling through the same patterns without taking time to reflect. We parted as friends, and his respect for my boundaries reinforced my growing ability to identify healthy relationships and set appropriate limits. I was learning to recognize what genuine care looked like, as opposed to conditional acceptance that could be withdrawn at any moment. My support group continued to be a cornerstone of my healing journey. As one of the veterans now, I found myself offering guidance to newcomers, sharing coping strategies that had worked for me and providing the same validation that had been so crucial in my early days. During one meeting, a new member named Lucia shared her story of being cut off by her mother after disagreeing about caregiving for her grandmother. The worst part is not knowing if I will ever matter to her again, Lucia said through tears. Like everything we shared meant nothing. Your relationship mattered, I told her, recognizing my former despair in her expression, even if she is making choices that suggest otherwise. What you shared was real, and nothing can erase that history, even if the future looks different than you expected. The words were as much for myself as for her, a truth I was still internalizing. Around this time, I began volunteering with a local mentorship program for young girls without fathers in their lives. Every Saturday morning, I met with Zoe, a quiet 12-year-old whose father had left when she was 4. We visited museums, worked on homework, or simply talked about the challenges of navigating the world without paternal presence. Does it ever stop hurting? Zoe asked one day as we shared ice cream cones in the park. I considered the question carefully before answering. The hurt changes, I said finally. It becomes less sharp, more like a dull ache that comes and goes, and you build wonderful things around it. Friendships, achievements, moments of joy, so that the hurt is just one part of your story, not the whole thing. Zoe nodded thoughtfully, licking her ice cream. I think I understand. It is like how my mom says you can learn to live with a scar. Exactly like that, I agreed, marveling at her wisdom. These conversations with Zoe often provided unexpected insights into my own healing process. In helping her find language for her experience, I clarified my own understanding of what I had been through and how far I had come. My grandmother remained a steady presence despite the physical distance, calling weekly and visiting whenever possible. During one call, she shared news that caused a momentary reopening of my wounds. I ran into Linda Williams at my bridge club, Grandma said, referring to an old family friend. She mentioned seeing your father and Janet at a restaurant last week. Apparently Janet was wearing quite an expensive-looking diamond bracelet. I felt a familiar twinge of pain imagining Dad celebrating with Janet, while I had been completely erased from his life. But the feeling passed more quickly than it once would have, leaving behind resignation rather than fresh agony. I hope they are happy, I said, surprised to find I partially meant it. Not because I had forgiven what they had done, but because their happiness or unhappiness had increasingly little impact on my daily life. You are a better person than I am, Grandma replied, but then you always have been. 6 months after that cafe meeting, my life had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. Externally, I had a new apartment, a promotion, an expanded social circle, and new routines. Internally, I had developed a stronger sense of self-worth, independent of external validation, healthier boundaries, and a deeper understanding of my own resilience. The pain had not disappeared entirely. There were still nights when memories ambushed me, still birthdays and holidays that felt incomplete, still moments when a father and daughter on the street would trigger a wave of grief. But those moments no longer defined me or determined the course of my days. What I could not have anticipated was how this hard-won equilibrium would be tested when my father suddenly reappeared in my life, needing exactly what he had so callously discarded: a daughter who would stand by him no matter what. 6 months and 12 days after my father told me I was no longer his child, my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I had been ignoring similar calls for weeks, assuming they were sales pitches or wrong numbers. This time, for reasons I cannot explain, I answered. "Hello," I said, balancing the phone between my ear and shoulder as I sorted through work documents at my dining table. Silence greeted me initially, then a halting breath. "Hannah." The voice was instantly recognizable, despite its uncharacteristic uncertainty. "Hannah, it is me. It is Dad." My hand froze above the papers. 6 months of therapy had prepared me for many eventualities, but not for how completely my body would react to hearing his voice again. The instant tightening in my chest, the rush of adrenaline, the competing urges to both hang up immediately and desperately continue the conversation. "What do you want?" I finally managed my voice deliberately neutral. "I know I have no right to call you," he began, his words rushing together. "But Hannah, I need to talk to you. Things have changed. Could we meet somewhere?" "Why?" The question came out harsher than I intended, but I made no attempt to soften it. "I would rather explain in person," he said. When I did not immediately respond, he added with audible desperation, "Please, Hannah, I would not ask if it was not important." Against my better judgment, against the advice I would have given anyone in my support group, I agreed to meet him the following day at the same cafe where he had disowned me 6 months earlier. I told myself it was for closure, for answers, but a part of me, a part I was not proud of, simply needed to see him again. I called Sophie immediately after hanging up. "He wants to meet tomorrow," I told her, pacing my living room. "What do you think he wants?" "Nothing good," Sophie replied bluntly. "Hannah, are you sure about this? You have been doing so well." "I need to know why he is reaching out now," I said. "But I promise I will protect myself. I am not the same person I was 6 months ago." Soon. The next day, I dressed carefully in my most confidence-boosting outfit. A tailored navy pantsuit I had purchased with my promotion bonus, paired with the necklace my grandmother had given me. I arrived exactly on time, refusing to sit waiting for him as I had before. Dad was already there, hunched at a corner table, looking nothing like the polished, rejuvenated man who had dismissed me from his life half a year earlier. He had lost more weight, his clothes hanging loosely on his frame. Deep lines etched his face and his hair had visibly greyed. When he stood to greet me, his movements were those of a much older man. "Hannah," he said, taking a half step toward me before reading my body language and retreating. "Thank you for coming." I sat without removing my coat, a deliberate signal that this would not be a lengthy conversation. "You said it was important." Dad nodded, his hands fidgeting with a paper napkin. "It is. Everything has checked." He paused, seeming to struggle for words. "Janet and I are getting divorced." Of all the scenarios I had imagined, this was admittedly one of them, but the reality of hearing it still caught me off guard. "I am sorry to hear that," I said automatically, years of politeness overriding my more complex emotions. "She was having an affair," he continued, his voice hollow, "with her boss at the dealership. Apparently it started before we even got married. I found out 2 months ago when I surprised her at work for lunch." I nodded, waiting for him to continue, unsure what response he expected from me. "That is not the worst of it," Dad went on, looking down at the table. "After I confronted her, things unraveled quickly. She admitted she had never really loved me. She was attracted to what she thought was financial security. She had been spending far beyond our means, maxing out credit cards I did not even know existed." He looked up, his expression haunted. "I am ruined, Hannah. The house has 2 mortgages I did not know about. She convinced me to invest in her brother's business venture, which turned out to be little more than a pyramid scheme. My retirement savings are decimated. At 62, I am basically starting over." The revelation landed with a weight I had not anticipated. Despite everything, seeing him so utterly broken brought no satisfaction, only a complicated sadness. "I am sorry that happened to you," I said carefully, "but I do not understand why you are telling me this." Dad's expression crumpled slightly. Because I have no one else, Hannah. All our old friends, my friends, she systematically pushed them away too. I did not realize how isolated I had become until everything fell apart. And now you want to undo that isolation, I observed, keeping my tone even. Now that Janet is gone, you remember you have a daughter. He flinched at the accuracy of my assessment, but did not deny it. I know how it looks. I know what I did was unforgivable. But Hannah, I was not thinking clearly. Janet had this way of making everything she wanted seem reasonable, even necessary. She made you tell your only child she was not your child anymore. I asked, the calm in my voice belying the storm beneath. She forced those exact words out of your mouth. Dad's eyes filled with tears. No, those were my words, and I will regret them until the day I die. But she orchestrated this situation where I felt I had to choose. She threatened to leave, constantly said she could not build a life with someone who was still so enmeshed with his adult daughter. She made it seem like an unhealthy dependence rather than a normal, loving relationship. And you believed her, I stated flatly. I was a fool, he admitted, his voice breaking. A complete fool who threw away the most precious relationship in my life for someone who was manipulating me from the beginning. He reached across the table as if to take my hand, but I subtly shifted back, maintaining the physical and emotional distance between us. Hannah, he said, desperation evident in his voice. I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I need help. Not just financially, though I am drowning in debt. I need someone who understands finance to help me figure out what to do. And I need... His voice caught. I need my daughter back. I need family. There it was. The request I had partially expected. He needed practical assistance with the financial mess and emotional support to rebuild his life. He needed exactly what I had needed 6 months ago when he had chosen to walk away. I see, I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee to gather my thoughts. You need my professional expertise as a financial analyst and my personal support as the daughter you disowned. Is that correct? He winced at my phrasing but nodded. I know it is asking the impossible. What about starting fresh? I asked, unable to keep a slight edge from my voice. Wasn't that the plan? A clean break from the past. I was wrong, Dad whispered, a tear finally escaping to track down his cheek. So terribly wrong. If you could find any way to forgive me, any path back to some kind of relationship, I would spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you. I looked at him, really looked at him, seeing both the father who had braided my hair and taught me to drive, and the man who had casually discarded me when someone else demanded it. Both were real, both were true. And I needed to respond to the complete reality, not just the version that my heart wanted to remember. I need some time to think about this, I said, finally gathering my purse and standing. I will call you in a few days. Of course, he said quickly, relief evident in his expression. Take all the time you need. I will wait for however long it takes. As I walked to my car, my emotions churned with such intensity that I had to sit in the driver's seat for several minutes before trusting myself to drive. The father who had abandoned me was now abandoned himself, experiencing the very pain he had inflicted on me. There was a certain symmetry to it, but it brought no satisfaction, only a complex tangle of feelings I would need help sorting through. That evening, I called Dr. Martinez and scheduled an emergency session for the following day. I also reached out to my support group, many of whom had faced similar situations when estranged parents suddenly needed something and reappeared in their lives. You do not owe him anything, Rachel reminded me during a long phone conversation. Not your financial expertise, not your emotional support, not your forgiveness. But it is not that simple, I admitted. Despite everything, there is still a part of me that loves him, that remembers the good father he was for most of my life. Those memories are valid, Rachel acknowledged, but so is the pain he caused. Whatever you decide, it needs to protect your healing first. During my session with Dr. Martinez, we explored the various options and their potential impact on my well-being. There is no single right answer here, she assured me. You could choose to help him professionally, but maintain emotional distance. You could decline any involvement. You could tentatively explore rebuilding a relationship with very clear boundaries. The important question is what serves your health and healing best. After 3 days of deep reflection, consultation, and internal debate, I made my decision. I composed a carefully worded email to my father, my fingers hovering over the send button for several minutes before I finally committed. The message was brief but clear. Dad, I have given considerable thought to your request for help and a renewed relationship. After careful consideration, I believe the most appropriate response is to echo the wisdom you shared with me 6 months ago. We need to start fresh without the past. As you explained then, sometimes a clean break is necessary for new beginnings. I wish you well in your fresh start. Hannah. I included no further explanation, no expression of the complex emotions behind my decision. Just his own words returned to him as he had once delivered them to me. Clear, unambiguous, and final. Within minutes of sending the email, my phone began ringing with his number. I did not answer. The calls continued throughout the evening, followed by increasingly desperate text messages. Hannah, please? I understand why you are angry. I deserve this, but please just talk to me. I am truly sorry for everything. Please give me a chance to make it right. I need you, Hannah. You are my daughter. You will always be my daughter. That last message nearly broke my resolve. You will always be my daughter. 6 months too late, he had reversed his position entirely. I turned off my phone that night, giving myself permission to process my decision without his influence. The choice I had made was not about revenge, though it might appear that way to him. It was about protecting the new life and identity I had built, about honoring the hard work of healing I had done, about recognizing that some betrayals permanently alter the landscape of a relationship. The next morning, I found a voicemail from Sophie. Hannah, your dad showed up at my apartment looking for you. He was pretty distraught. I did not tell him anything, but I thought you should know he is trying to find you. Call me when you can. This unexpected escalation concerned me. I called Sophie immediately. What exactly did he say? I asked. That he desperately needed to speak with you, that he had made a terrible mistake and needed to make it right, she replied. Hannah, he was crying. It was uncomfortable, but I stuck to saying I could not help him. Thank you, I said sincerely. I appreciate you protecting my privacy. Later that afternoon, my office receptionist called to inform me that a Mark Anderson was in the lobby insisting on seeing me. He says he is your father, she added. Should I send him up? No, I replied firmly. Please tell him I am in meetings all day and cannot be disturbed. If he refuses to leave, security should be called. The boundary felt necessary but painful to enforce. This was the father who had attended every school play, who had driven 5 hours when I had the flu in college, who had been my most reliable supporter for most of my life. But it was also the man who had casually discarded me when someone else demanded it, who had only returned when he needed something from me. In the end, he left without incident, but the next day, a massive bouquet arrived at my apartment with a card that read, simply, I will never stop trying to make this right. I love you. Dad. I donated the flowers to a nearby nursing home and added his email to my blocked list, maintaining the boundary I had established while acknowledging the complexity of my feelings about it. This was not the clean, satisfying conclusion that movies might portray. There was no triumphant moment of justice, no cathartic confrontation that resolved 28 years of history. There was only a quiet, private commitment to honor my own worth, to recognize that someone who could discard me once could do so again, and to continue building a life where my value was not dependent on someone else's validation, even someone I had once loved more than anyone else in the world. 1 year after my father had told me I was no longer his child, I hosted Thanksgiving dinner in my apartment for what I now considered my chosen family. Sophie was there with her new boyfriend Ryan. Marcos brought his husband David. Alyssa came with her sister who was visiting from Seattle. 3 friends from my support group joined us along with my grandmother who had flown in for the week. My apartment, once a sparse refuge during the worst of my grief, had transformed into a warm, inviting space filled with photographs, art collected during my travels, and comfortable furniture, arranged for conversation and connection. The dining table, a vintage piece I had refinished myself, was extended to its full length and covered with a feast that we had all contributed to preparing. As we settled in to eat, Grandma Elaine raised her glass. I would like to propose a toast, she said, her voice still strong at 78. To Hannah, who has shown us all what it means to rebuild with grace and dignity, and to all of you who became her family when she needed one most. I am grateful that my granddaughter is surrounded by such love. Looking around the table at these people who had chosen to be in my life and whom I had chosen in return, I felt a fullness that had seemed impossible a year ago. The absence of my father was still a presence in its own way, a quiet ache that occasionally made itself known, but it no longer defined me or my capacity for connection. In the weeks following my decision to return my father's words to him, he had made several more attempts to reach me. He had sent letters I returned unopened. left voicemails I deleted unheard, and even appeared at a coffee shop near my office, where I occasionally worked. Each time I maintained the boundary I had established, not out of cruelty, but out of self-preservation. Eventually, the attempts had become less frequent. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned he had moved to a smaller apartment, found work at a different architectural firm, and started attending a support group for divorced men. I wished him well from a distance, but remained committed to the separate path I had chosen. My own life had continued to evolve in ways that surprised and delighted me. The promotion I had received 6 months after my father's rejection had led to further advancements. I now headed a department specializing in financial recovery for individuals and small businesses facing economic hardship. My experience volunteering with young girls without fathers had deepened into a more formal role with the organization, where I now conducted workshops on financial literacy for teenagers from single-parent homes. This work had unexpectedly become one of the most fulfilling aspects of my life, transforming my personal pain into practical support for others facing similar challenges. Next month, we are expanding the program to include college preparation workshops. I shared with the table as we enjoyed pumpkin pie and coffee after dinner. Helping these young women navigate scholarship applications and financial aid forms, it is incredible to see their confidence grow when they realize college is actually within reach. "You have found your calling within your profession," Grandma observed with evident pride. "Catherine would be so pleased to see how you have channeled your talents." The mention of my mother, something that had once been painful in the absence of my father's shared memories, now brought a gentle warmth. Through Grandma's stories and photographs, my connection to my mother had deepened over the past year, becoming a source of strength rather than just loss. As the evening progressed and conversations flowed around the table, I found myself in a quiet moment in the kitchen with Sophie as we loaded the dishwasher. "Are you okay?" she asked softly, knowing that holidays could still trigger complicated emotions. "Today must bring up some memories." "It does," I acknowledged, rinsing a serving platter. "But mostly I feel grateful. A year ago, I could not have imagined hosting Thanksgiving or feeling this whole. You and everyone here, you helped rebuild me when I was shattered." Sophie squeezed my shoulder. "You rebuilt yourself, Hannah. We just stood by and handed you tools when you needed them." Later, after my guests had departed and Grandma had retired to the guest room, I sat alone on my balcony with a cup of tea, looking out at the city lights. The night was chilly, but clear stars visible despite the urban glow. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Somehow, I knew before opening it that it would be from my father, likely having changed his number to bypass my blocks. The message was simple. "Happy Thanksgiving, Hannah. I love you always." A year earlier, such a message would have undone me completely. 6 months ago, it would have triggered a painful wave of anger and grief. Now I felt a complex but manageable sadness for what had been lost for the father who had made an irrevocable choice for the relationship that could never be fully restored. I did not respond to the message, but neither did I immediately delete it. Some wounds never completely heal, transforming, instead into scars that remain sensitive to the touch, but no longer threaten our well-being. My father's rejection had created such a scar, permanent but no longer debilitating. The most important lesson I had learned over the past year was that family is both an inheritance and a choice. We are born into certain relationships, but we actively create others. Some blood ties nurture and sustain us throughout our lives. Others may break under pressure or circumstance. When that happens, we are not doomed to isolation, but free to build new connections based on mutual respect, consistent care, and genuine understanding. I had lost a father, but gained a deeper appreciation for the chosen family surrounding me. I had experienced profound rejection, but discovered my own unshakable worth in the process. I had been told I was no longer someone's child, but had become more fully my own person as a result. As I finished my tea and prepared for bed, I thought about the young women I mentored, many of whom struggled with absent or unreliable fathers. In our next session, I would share with them the truth I had fought so hard to learn, that our value is inherent, not dependent on someone else's recognition. That abandonment, while devastating, is survivable, that we can build beautiful lives even after the people we thought would always be there choose to walk away. This was not the life I had expected or the family I had been born into. But it was a life of meaning, connection, and growing joy. A life I had carefully constructed from the broken pieces of what came before. And for that, despite everything, I was grateful. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after someone you deeply trusted chose someone else? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story might help others feeling alone in similar situations. Hit that like button. If you found strength in this journey, subscribe for more stories of resilience and share with someone who might need to hear that they too can rebuild after betrayal. Thank you for witnessing my story, and remember, sometimes the family we create is more healing than the one we were born into.